Preview.
By a wide margin, President Donald Trump is substantially less popular than past Republican presidents George W. Bush and Ronald Reagan. Only 38% of Americans report a favorable view of Trump, while a majority 56% of the public express an unfavorable opinion of him. In contrast, a majority of Americans have a favorable view of George W. Bush 53% and Ronald Reagan 65%. Public views of Trump are also strikingly different from how George W. Bush 61% favorable and Ronald Reagan 70% favorable were viewed at a similar time in their presidencies. Among Republicans, all three presidents are highly regarded. Roughly 8 in 10 79% Republicans report a favorable opinion of Trump, while 85% hold favorable views of Bush and 91% hold favorable views of Reagan. Notably, Republicans are more likely to have very favorable views of Trump than Bush 44% versus 32%, respectively. However, 61% of Republicans feel very favorable towards Reagan. Trump is viewed far more negatively among non-white Americans than previous Republican presidents. Only 16% of black Americans view Trump favorably, fewer than half of the number who have favorable opinions of Bush 34% and Reagan 49%. Only about 1 in 5 21% Hispanics view Trump favorably, half the number who view Bush 47% and Reagan 50% favorably. Nearly half 46% of white Americans have a favorable view of Trump, while nearly 6 in 10 59% have a favorable view of Bush and nearly 3/4 72% view Reagan favorably. There is a significant education divide among whites, especially in opinions about the current president. Trump is viewed much more favorably among whites with no more than high school education 54% than he is among whites with a four-year college degree 34%. Bush is viewed about as favorably among whites who have no college experience 60% and those with a college degree 59%. Reagan is also viewed favorably by both whites with a high school degree or less 73% and those with a college degree 73%. Similarly, there is a substantial gender divide in views about Trump that is absent in views of Bush and Reagan. Men are significantly more likely than women to have a favorable opinion of Trump 44% versus 31% respectively. Conversely, more than 6 in 10 62% women feel negatively towards Trump, compared to about half 51% of men. Majorities of men and women have a favorable view of Bush 52% versus 54% respectively and Reagan 67% versus 63% respectively. White evangelical Protestants maintain positive feelings toward all three Republican presidents. Nearly 2/3 65% of white evangelical Protestants have a favorable view of Trump, compared to 78% who view Bush positively and 92% with a favorable opinion of Reagan. Although Bush is viewed somewhat more positively than Trump overall, white evangelicals are more likely to express a very favorable opinion of Trump than Bush 36% versus 26%, respectively. The gender divide in views of Trump is also evident among white evangelical Protestants. More than 3/4 76% of white evangelical Protestant men feel favorably towards Trump, compared to 57% of white evangelical Protestant women. Reagan versus Trump. Who represents Republican values among Republicans? Reagan is seen as the better representative of the party's principles and values than Trump. More than 2/3 69% of Republicans say Reagan better represents the core principles and values of the GOP, compared to about 1/4 24% who say Trump better represents the party's values. Among Republicans there are modest divisions by age and education. Republicans with a high school education or less are more likely than those with a college degree to say that Trump best represents the GOP's principles and values 33% versus 13%, respectively. Perhaps surprisingly, Republican seniors age 65 or older are also more likely than those under the age of 50 to say Trump is the best representative of Republican values 36% versus 20%, respectively. Even Republicans who hold a favorable view of Trump say that Reagan is a better exemplar of Republican Party values and principles than Trump 63% versus 30%, respectively. Americans express generally negative feelings about Russia's and Russian President Vladimir Putin. Nearly 6 in 10 58% Americans express a negative opinion of Russia, while only 1/4 25% have a positive view. Views have grown only slightly more negative since 2013, when 54% of the public reported feeling unfavorably toward Russia. 3 The modest rise in negative sentiment was driven nearly exclusively by Democrats. More than two-thirds, 68% of Democrats express a negative view of Russia, compared to about half, 51%, who reported feeling this way in 2013. Republican feelings toward Russia have been stable, with about 6 in 10, 59%, expressing unfavorable views of Russia today, and in 2013, 58%. The views of independents also remained largely unchanged during this period, with a majority, 52%, expressing an unfavorable opinion about Russia today versus 53% in 2013. There are only modest differences by race and ethnicity. About a quarter, 27% of white Americans, compared to about 1 in 5 black, 20%, and Hispanic, 19%, Americans have a positive impression of Russia. Notably, there are no significant educational differences among whites. Among religious groups, there is a consensus of opinion about Russia. More than 6 in 10 black Protestants, 66%, white Catholics, 65%, and white evangelical Protestants, 63%, and majorities of religiously unaffiliated Americans, 57%, and white mainline Protestants, 57%, have an unfavorable view of Russia. Young Americans are less likely to express hostility toward Russia. More than a third, 34% of young adults age 18 to 29 report having a favorable view of Russia, compared to only 18% of seniors. Half, 50% of young adults, but nearly 7 in 10, 69% seniors, express an unfavorable view. Vladimir Putin is viewed even more negatively than Russia. Roughly two-thirds, 66% of the public say they have an unfavorable opinion of the Russian leader, while only 15% view him positively. Nearly 1 in 5, 19% Americans offer no opinion or report being unfamiliar with Putin. Strong majorities of Democrats, 77%, Republicans, 65%, and Independents, 63%, have an unfavorable view of Putin. Notably, half, 50% of Democrats have a very unfavorable view of him, compared to 31% of Republicans. Russia enemy or ally? Only about a third of Americans consider Russia either an ally, 8%, or friendly toward the U.S., 26%. A majority of the public see Russia as unfriendly, 31%, or an enemy, 24% of the U.S. American views appear strongly conditioned on political affiliation. More than 4 in 10, 43%, Republicans view Russia as an ally or friendly, a view shared by only 28% of Democrats. About half, 49%, of Republicans believe Russia is unfriendly or an enemy, compared to two-thirds, 67% of Democrats. Democrats are more than twice as likely as Republicans to say Russia is America's enemy, 37% versus 18%, respectively. Attitudes differ markedly by generation as well. Young adults are about twice as likely as seniors to perceive Russia as either an ally or a friend to the U.S., 42% versus 20%, respectively. More than 7 in 10, 71% seniors say Russia is unfriendly toward the U.S. or as an enemy, a view shared by fewer than half, 49% of young adults. Seniors are more than twice as likely as young people to say Russia is America's enemy, 35% versus 16%, respectively. Americans with a favorable view of Trump are much more likely to have a positive opinion of Russia. Nearly half, 48% of Americans who feel positively about Trump perceive Russia to be America's ally or friend. In contrast, only about a quarter, 26% of Americans who have an unfavorable view of Trump say the same. Russian interference in the 2016 election. Fewer than half, 48% of Americans believe there is clear evidence that Russia interfered in the 2016 election to help the Trump campaign. More than 4 in 10, 43% disagree, while about 1 in 10, 9% offer no opinion. Views are sharply divided by party. 8 in 10, 80% Democrats, compared to only 20% of Republicans, agree there is conclusive evidence of Russian involvement. Independents align with the public overall. There is considerable disagreement between Americans by race and ethnicity. Nearly three-quarters, 73% of black Americans, and a majority, 52% of Hispanics agree there is evidence of Russian interference. Only 43% of white Americans agree. Nearly half, 49%, disagree. However, the views of whites are highly stratified by education level. Nearly 6 in 10, 58% whites with a college degree say there is clear evidence of Russian election interference, compared to only 36% of whites without a college degree. Another important part of Trump's base, white evangelical Protestants, are also unlikely to believe Russia played much if any role in the 2016 election. 7 in 10, 70% white evangelical Protestants do not believe there is clear evidence of Russia's involvement in the 2016 presidential election. Support for impeaching the president has increased significantly over the last 6 months. Currently, 4 in 10, 40% Americans believe Trump deserves to be impeached, up 10 percentage points from 30% who expressed support for this action in February. A majority 53% of Americans do not believe Trump should be impeached and removed from office, a view held by 65% of the public in February. Much of the shift in attitudes about impeachment is the result of a substantial increase among Democrats. More than 7 in 10, 72% Democrats now favor impeaching President Trump, compared to 58% who expressed support for this action in February. Fewer than 4 in 10, 38% independents say Trump should be impeached and removed from office, but this is up from 27% who said he should be impeached in February. Views of Republicans remain roughly unchanged. Only 7% of Republicans believe Trump should be impeached, compared to 4% who held this view in February. There is a gaping gender divide in views about impeachment. Only about a third, 32% of men, but nearly half, 47% of women, say the president should be impeached and removed from office. Compared to men, women have become much more supportive of impeachment over the last 6 months. Only 35% of women favored impeaching Trump in February compared to 26% of men. Americans of different racial and ethnic backgrounds also express quite divergent views about impeachment. More than 7 in 10, 72% Black Americans, and a majority 53% of Hispanic Americans say Trump should be impeached and removed from office. Fewer than a third, 31% of white Americans agree. White Americans with a college degree are somewhat more likely to express support for impeachment than those without a college education, 39% versus 27%, respectively. In February, only about a quarter, 24% of whites with a college education supported impeachment, while fewer than 1 in 5, 19% whites without a college degree said the same. White evangelical Protestants are among the most resistant to the idea of impeachment. Nearly 8 in 10, 79% white evangelical Protestants say Trump should not be impeached. More than 6 in 10 white mainline Protestants, 63%, and white Catholics, 61%, also oppose impeaching the president. Religiously unaffiliated Americans are divided, with about as many in support of impeachment, 46%, as opposed to it, 45%, violating the Constitution. Americans are divided over whether Trump has acted in ways that violate the U.S. Constitution. Approximately half, 49% of the public, believes Trump has violated the Constitution, while nearly as many, 43%, disagree. Notably, there has been no shift in views about whether Trump violated the Constitution over the past 6 months. In February, close to half, 47% of Americans, said Trump had violated the Constitution. Views about whether Trump violated the Constitution are conditioned by party affiliation. More than 8 in 10, 85% Republicans reject the notion that Trump violated the Constitution, while nearly 8 in 10, 78% Democrats say he has. The views of independents closely track those of the public overall. There is a similar gender divide on this issue. A majority, 54% of women, but only about 4 in 10, 43% men, believe Trump has acted in ways that contravene the Constitution. Young adults are far more likely than seniors to believe Trump violated the Constitution. Nearly 6 in 10, 59% young adults, compared to about 4 in 10, 41% seniors, believe Trump's actions violated the Constitution. Most white Christian religious groups do not believe Trump acted in ways that contravene the Constitution. A majority of white evangelical Protestants, 66%, white Catholics, 55%, and white mainline Protestants, 54%, do not believe Trump violated the Constitution. In contrast, a slim majority, 52%, of religiously unaffiliated Americans say Trump has violated the Constitution. Endnotes 1 Pew Research Center for the People. The Press Favorability Poll, July 2001. 2 NBC News Associated Press Poll, July 1981. Reagan's favorability is based on a slightly different question. Do you have a favorable or unfavorable opinion of Ronald Reagan? 3 Pew Research Center for the People and the Press Council on Foreign Relations, America's Place in the World Survey, October 2013. Recommended citation: Jones, Robert P., and Daniel Cox. Support for impeachment grows. Half of Americans believe Russia interfered with election. PRRI, 2017. https://www.prri.org. Research poll: Trump-Russia investigation, impeachment, Republican Party image by Gage Skidmore. Flickr.